everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar. Today we're going to look at something that was introduced into Visrep with the 7.5.12 update, which is the current release of Donman. And just so people know that this is a fairly advanced sort of part of the report writer that we'll be looking at today. So it's not going to be basic using Visrep. It is really an introduction to the calculated fields, where they are, and examples of how you can use them. Okay, so just so everyone's sort of up to date on that. Okay, so if I go into Visual Reporter and I'm starting a new report, as an example, choose donors, I can put in my criteria. That might just be first name, starts with, and X, something like that. But what we're more going to concentrate on more is under the Design tab, down the bottom here, you'll see there's a new area that is allowing us to do calculated fields. Now, when we sent out the update, there was a Visrep report that we included as part of that, which should be in people's DM work directory, which had some examples of some of the fields and how you can use them. Calculated fields allows us to do things that we haven't been able to do before, like show age, on a report based on the date of birth field. Using that, we can then also use the age calculated field as part of our criteria. So I'll open up a report that I've done that's got some fields in, and I'll sort of explain them as we go through. So you can see now I'm on my Design tab, and down here you can see there's a couple of fields that are calculated fields. So you can see the bottom one here is age. So when I've created a new one, if I click on Add, you then type in the name for what you want to have the field called. So in this case I've called it age. From there it's alpha, which means it's a character field, so it's basically text. It can be a date field, a floating, an integer, or a number. In this case, I've used age as an integer, which means I'm only going to show the actual full number. It's not going to have, a .00 or any decimal points after that. By utilizing that, okay, I can then say I'm looking for the donor's date of birth divided by 365.25, which will give me the number of years based on the date of birth. Once I've got the actual fields here, and other ones that we can use are things like we can use, if I just maximize this a little bit, so the year of the date first. So in this particular one, it's basically saying I've called it what I'm going to identify it as, but it's then looking at the year, so the actual parameter here is the year, and then the field in brackets is the donor's date first. So I'm now getting the year that the person first gave a donation. I can then utilize that, again, as part of my reporting. So I might have something where I said, look, let's find the year of the person's first donation and the year of their most current donation, and I can then use that to do some calculations. Okay? So there are a few different ones. So you can now see that I've got the year of the date first, and I've got the year of the last donation. So just like I was saying then, I've got the year from the date of first gift, and I've got the year from the date of last gift. The next calculated field down is really saying that I'm now looking at the year of the donor's last gift minus the year of the donor's first gift. So this will then give me an idea of how many years it is between the person's first gift and their last gift. So you can use this, once you've sort of created these formulas or calculated fields, you can copy and then paste them into other reports that you're doing. So you might end up with a single report that you have a whole lot of different calculated fields in, because from there, if I wanted to do a new one, I could basically copy that and go into a new report. I could call it the same name and use exactly the same fields. So I'd basically copy these three here. So I'd copy the year of the last one, and then the difference. Okay. One of the other things that it allows us to do, because historically reporting with the report writer means that I can extract the donor details, but I'd also have to do the title, first name, surname, or just first name, surname, and the company name. I couldn't do one or the other. Whereas when I've got something here, so under my donor one, so in this case it is a string or it's an alphanumeric one, and it's got saying if the donor's donor type equals, so if you've got I for individual or P for private, whatever it is that you identify individuals with, then I'm saying from there I want to show the donor's first name, then a space, and then the donor's surname. Otherwise it's going to show the donor's company name. Yeah. So this works very similar to how the if-then-else statements work in either Excel or Word. So if you've got fields in some of your receipt documents where you're saying, let's look at the donation amount, and if it's this, I want to put, generous on the letter, or I want to put very generous, or whatever variations you've got of that. So the principle of this is exactly the same, where I'm saying if this field here, just highlight that. So in this case, that's the field that I'm looking for, and then if it's greater than, less than, whatever the check here is, and in this case, I'm saying it's looking to see if the donor type equals individual. If that's true, then after the first comma here, it's then saying this is what to do if it's true. If it's not true, then the last comma is saying what to do if that's false. Yeah? So sometimes getting your head around the actual workings of an if-then-else statement can be a little bit tricky, but the basic principle is saying I want to change what's showing in the report based on something that's changing in the data. So very similar to what we do in some of the receipt documents or what we do in Excel sometimes. So if I then go to the data field, so once I've got my calculated fields, under my data, I can also then use the calculated fields. So in this case here, you can see I've got the calculated field for age, and how I put those into the report is where I click here to select fields. I then would have a new entry here for calculated fields once I've created some. Okay, so until you create one, you won't have them. You'll just have the normal sort of listing here. But once I've got a field there, if I said preview, so as we go across, I'm getting sort of the normal things that I'd have. I've got my donor number. I've got the date of first gift for the donor, and you can now see the first of the calculated fields is now showing with the year from that field there. Then I've got the date of the last gift. So in this case, that also happens to be 2002. Okay? So I'm pulling up the year from there. In this case, there is no difference. So it's basically saying there's nothing to show. Whereas the next donor down, I can see the first gift was in 1986, the most current one, 2008. It's now showing with it the difference is 22 years. So I can use this for doing age of donors or other things. So in this case, it's really just using the three calculated fields to say I want to pull this part of the field out. You can do the same thing for day and month. So you could have, month of, donor's date first, and you could utilize that. Okay. From there, the next field across is elapsed, and if we go back to the Design tab, you can see that I've then got a field here called Status. And it works the same as the other one, where I'm saying if, and here's the field that I'm looking at, that the year of the donor's date last is less than 2013, then I'm going to put lapsed, or I'm going to put current. And then that reflects in the actual report here. So if I said, well, that's nice, but now I want to actually only show the current people or the lapsed people. So once I've created the calculated field, when I do my criterion and click where it's got donors.recnum, I can now also choose calculated fields, the same as I can down here to actually add them into the report. So if I then said I'm looking for status equals current. So now the criteria of the report has changed, and I am now only showing people that are current, and I can see based on the year or last gift, in this case, of my data, they're all 2014. which based on my criteria is saying that these are now considered as current donors. Okay? So it's not just about creating a field that you can sort of, do something special with and show in the report. It's about also using those fields. If we go back, take the criteria out, okay, so I've then got everyone again. Okay? So you can also see where I've created a calculated field here for the year. The next one across after status is the month of the last date. Okay, so in this case it's the 5th, so it's showing me the month. So you can sort of, as I said, you can use the date, you can use the month, you can use the year, but in this sort of example that I've done, it's really just to give me some mechanism that I can say, well, let's have a look at, people whose, difference in years is a certain number. And of course then we could use that as our criteria to say, well, let's find people whose difference in years is 10 plus, which means from their first gift till their most recent gift, there's at least 10 years between them. So it's not saying that they've always been a constant donor or anything like that, but it is giving you something that you can sort of utilize to do the reports on. As we go across, the other field that I've included in this case is the date of birth, and from that is where we've calculated the age. So the age is really down here where we're saying it's today minus the donor's date of birth divided by 365.25, which is really just to give us the full year for that. So the same sort of thing, I can then use the year in my criteria. So if I'm doing a report where I'm trying to make sure that the people I'm writing to are, say, all adults, so, if I've got children on the database, etc., and I don't want those, then I can say, well, I'm looking now for the age has to be greater than, 18. Or it might be something where I'm trying to find people who, based on date of birth, are 60 plus. So I can do the same sort of things and go back to the data and say, now I'm looking for a calculated field of age greater than or equal. So if I just say 40. Okay. So that narrows down the report. So just like any other criteria, this comes into play now, the same as it would be if I said, the date of birth, and I had to then go and work out, how long ago 40 years was. So sometimes it's much harder to do that than it is to actually just create the calculated field that I can then use in my reporting. The last column from there is where it's either showing the donor's name in the case of an individual, or it's showing the company name in the case of a company record. Okay? And that was one of the other calculated fields. So looking at this sort of thing, it's really saying that if I was creating a new calculated field, okay, or even doing a new report, so we just file, we'll start a new report. So the same sort of thing, if I choose donors, in this case I'll just sort by donor number, and I want to do some criteria based on the calculated field. So the first thing I need to do is go to the Design tab, and you can see here, because I haven't done any, I can then add. Okay. I can then, if I wanted to do the age one, I could say, yes, it's age, as an integer, and then I could then put in the same formula that I had previously. Okay, so if I had copied it from the old report, I could then just paste that in. Otherwise, I can put the formula in manually. Okay, so you can do things where it's T minus or we can just type that in. But I think once you've done the work once, you really don't want to have to type it in, because if you make a mistyping, you'll go, oh, now my field's not working. So it is much easier. So even if you get a few of these calculated fields, as we've done while we've been sort of working out the mechanisms of this and using it for ourselves, that you might end up with a spreadsheet where you put a number of these calculated fields in. So then while you're doing the report, you can go to the spreadsheet, just copy and paste the actual calculated field into here, and then that becomes something you can utilize in your report. Because the old way of doing something like that would have been, I'd have to say, I'm looking for Okay, so I go through all my fields, okay, or I do date of birth, less than or equal, and then I have to calculate how far back it was and what the actual date of that was. You know, if I wanted to go back 35 years or 60 years or something like that. So hopefully that sort of shows that, you know, we can do a whole lot better by using some of these calculated fields, showing those in the actual data, or even just using them as part of the criteria. So you don't actually have to show them all the time, as long as you know that you've got the calculated field there, and you're doing that as you go through. So once you've got the calculated field, if you said, look, I don't want it and I've got something there, you can then edit it. And the two ways to edit, I'll go back to my previous report. Okay, so the two ways to edit are if you just click on it and you click on the edit button, or if you double click, we'll bring up the screen where you're creating the field anyway. Yeah. But from there, you can do a fair bit as far as utilizing these fields. So certainly it's not for, you know, someone who's very new to Visrep and somebody who sort of isn't quite sure where the fields are, or certainly, you know, some of the calculations. But some of the easy ones that you can use are the things like the year, where I'm just trying to find the year of a certain thing, and then I can, you know, also work out other things like we've done in this report to show that. One of the other ways, and something that we had a question on recently, was doing a report based on, you know, how many people in certain age brackets. So based on that, and using the age parameter here, I'll open another report. Okay, so in this particular one, you can see I've got fields that say 65 to 69, 70 to 74, 75, all the way through, plus I've got the standard age one that I created in the upper report. So in this case, if I wanted to see how that was done, so the age one's the same, so it's basically today minus the donor's date of birth divided by our 365.25. If I go into my 65 to 69 range, so this one's getting a little bit more complex than the previous one. So it's basically saying if the date of birth is greater than or equal 65, and in this case we've got additional parameters and I've got an and in there. So I can say if this is true and the second part is also true, then I can show something on the report. So where the previous one stopped basically at that point there, we've now added an additional parameter that says, okay, I'm looking for the age basically has to be greater than or equal 65 or less than 70. So if it's then less than 70, in this case I'm just putting a 1 in the field or I'm putting nothing. Okay, so I can then do the next range and say I'm looking for, you know, they must be greater than or equal to 70 and less than 70 is 4. So whatever ranges that you wanted to do, you can then set up the different ranges. So on the report, I've got calculated age must be greater than 65. So that will always, because it's a calculated field, the report would never have to change, and I wouldn't have to change the date like I would have had to have done if I was doing it the way previously by using the date of birth greater than or equal and actually putting a physical date in there. So you can see, once I've got the calculated field of 65, I can certainly use that in the report very easily. If I then go down here, so I've got the donor's date of birth, and then I've got my calculated fields for my different age ranges and the actual age itself. We then look at the preview tab. We can now see the date of birth. If the criteria is met, so I've got them here, it's then putting a 1 in. And in this case, this is just so I can do a count of how many records are in there. The very last one is then showing me the age of the record. Okay? So you can see in this case that based on my criteria on the data tab, that the age calculated field is greater than or equal, and in this case I started at 65. Okay? If we wanted to change that to 40, we don't have to play around with dates or do any of those other things. We can just go through. Okay? So in this case I'm now getting people that are 40. Okay? Because I haven't got a range that's, you know, 40 to 50 or whatever it might be, that's not showing on the report. But in this case, it was more just to highlight that it is still using that same calculated criteria to show it in the report. Same sort of thing if we said greater than 70. And then go back to preview. So in this case, I can see I'm getting nothing in the first range, although strangely I've got a count of records there. I think it's the total count of records, not the values. Okay. But there I can see that there are no values in that field because I've now upped the criteria to say even though the calculated field is there to show me that example of the data, the part here is saying no, it really starts at the 70 plus range. Okay. So the calculated fields will give us quite a bit of power with what we can do, and there are certainly a lot of other things that as we go along, we'll be discovering and we'll be, hopefully getting things programmed in, and we'll be able to do a whole lot of other stuff. But as I said, in the update, we did put a report out, like a dummy report. I think it's just called Calculated Field Test Report or something. They did have some of these basic calculated fields in that people can utilize or play with. I'm pretty sure that there'll be a lot of people that, once you get your head around the structure of how the calculated fields are made, etc., and how we can use them, that we'll be able to go through it and utilize these reports and make them fairly custom for yourselves or, for the users. Like any of the other reports, we can go through and do that. So just like lots of reports where people are now using, greater than or equal to T or M, so all of the normal calculated date fields that we have. So if we're looking for, okay, so normally in the case of donations or things like that, so you might have greater than or equal, and this is where you can do the Y minus, Y whatever it might be. Okay, so all of those calculated fields, or the precursor to the calculated fields, because it's not liking that one, okay, it's showing you here where you've got those standard ones like the quarter, the month, the week, the plus, the minus, etc. But I have seen quite a few people starting to utilize these sort of formulas, but the calculated fields goes far above and beyond what we could do previously. So that's sort of a quick intro to, using those, and no doubt we're opening a can of worms for ourselves for supporting this. But I'll hand over to Murray now, who will go through and show you additional things and some of the things that I haven't yet covered on using those calculated fields.
So, hi everybody. So what we've heard from Gary is we've heard and seen quite a large number of different uses that we can make of the calculated field. So I'm just going to go through a little bit more of the formal training to show you some of the things that can be done. He's used a lot of these, so when we see them, you'll know, oh yes, I've already seen that. So to start off with, we have those functions. Now, Gary's actually mentioned some of these already, and so as date functions, we have a few of those. Now, the first one that hasn't come up is where we can actually turn a string of data or text that represents a date. We can turn that into a date field so that we can then make use of that in our calculations. So if you've got some text that might be part of a string, maybe in the comment or something, if it's always in the same spot, we should be able to extract that, and we'll see how to do that a little bit later, and then turn that into a date so that we can do some calculations based on that, like Gary was doing with the date of birth. He was looking at how old they are. Well, we could perhaps do something similar with a date that we've extracted from some text. We've got the day. Now, he mentioned that briefly. So basically, for example, if we've got a report on the pledge file, we can look at the next date and find out what day of the month that particular pledge is due on. We've already seen month as well in Gary, and more particularly, we've seen the year that he's made a lot of use of in his reports that he's shown us so far. In terms of numeric functions, we've got integer, which will basically take an amount and strip it of any trailing decimal points. So if you do a division or calculation that might end up with 2.56, if we turn that into an integer, that then just becomes the 2. And we can convert a string into a number as well. So if we look at some string functions, we've got up the top there, we can convert a number into a string. So if we're doing some manipulation of strings, such as we want to add some text to a number, because they're a number and a string, you can't normally put those together. So what you have to do is you have to use that string option up the top there to say, okay, I've got this number, I want to use that and convert it to characters basically so that I can add some text either before or afterwards or both. The trim by itself will actually take any text that you give it in the string and remove any leading spaces or any trailing spaces. So quite often you might have some text in a field that has some trailing spaces, but you don't want that to actually be part of the calculated field, so you can just use trim. L trim for left trim and R trim for right trim are basically the same sort of thing, but instead of removing the trailing and leading spaces, the left trim will only remove the leading spaces, so it trims over on the left side, and the right trim will remove any trailing spaces. Quite often you may wish to find out what the length of a string is, so we have the length parameter or length function as well. Finally, we have the mid function. Now the mid function allows you to pull information from a string, but only part of it. So it's like doing a substring in Excel. And if you're fairly familiar with Excel, a lot of these functions here will have similar equivalents in Excel. With the mid, if you provide a string, you can tell it where to start and how long you want the substring to be. And we'll see a bit of an example of this a little bit later, but if you've got a string of, say, 20 characters and you only want from 10 through to 15, which is actually a length of 6, you would give it the string, whatever the field is in Donman. The start would be 10 and the length would be 6, and that will then provide you with a string that is 6 characters long, taken from that string. Now, when Gary was looking at the if, then, else, you saw that it was made up of 3 separate parts. The first part was the criterion, where you could specify under what conditions you would accept the true and what would be false, and then based on that there would be 2 different values that you could provide. One would be if it was true, and the second one would be if it is false. So as an example, if we're talking about the pledge file, we could say if the pledge amount is greater than 200, then we're going to, in our calculated field, we're going to actually have the word big pledge. If it's not greater than 200, then it's going to be small pledge. Another example, and Gary used the T- option when he was looking at the date of birth to calculate how old a person was. In this case, we can look at when a pledge was due, and we're subtracting that from today's date. So what this is going to give us is a number of days that pledge is effectively overdue. And so in this case, if it's over 100 days since that pledge was supposed to have been paid, and it obviously still hasn't, then we're going to put in some value there which says very lapsed. And at the end there, you'll see that it's basically got 2 sets of double quotes, which means it's going to put nothing there, essentially. So it'll either say very lapsed or it will be blank. Now, when you're doing the calculated fields, there are a number of different criteria that you can use. Now, if you're familiar with Visrep and setting up the criteria, and we saw Gary set up some of those earlier on, these should be fairly familiar to you. Equals compares things to see if they're the same. You've got greater than, you've got less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. Now, the last 2 there are the same. The greater than, less than symbol basically is the same as not equal to, as is the exclamation mark and equal as well. Now, each of these also has text equivalents, which I didn't put there, but EQ for equals, GT for greater than, GE would be greater than or equal to, NE is not equal to. So if we're comparing numbers and things like that, those standard comparisons you should be fairly used to from just your experience within Visrep as it is. However, there are some other ones that can be quite useful. for instance, contains. So if we compare things like if the pledge contains the word letter tax or the letters tax, then that would be true. So if we're looking for pledge campaigns, maybe they not all start with tax, although we do have an option for start with, but maybe it's like 15 tax, 14 tax, 13 tax. If we want to pull up those and say, if it's true, then we will do something, then we can use contains. The opposite of that is doesn't contain. So if we were trying to find maybe looking at extra codes, now for those that are not familiar with it, extra code Z with the S on the end is actually all 8 extra codes of each donor. So if they have 3 or 4, they will all be there, but there'll be spaces between them. So it makes it a little bit hard to say, well, you can't say donors.extracodes equals arch or arc for archive. So what you've got to do is you actually got to search within there. So if we want everybody, apart from those people that we flagged to be archived, then we would say it does not contain arch, and therefore it will only pick donors where they haven't got an extra code of arch. We've got in is found in. So in contact types, we have single letters. So we have E for email, M for mail out, T for telephone, you might have B for request visits, you might have a few others there. But if you are only wanting to match when you found the contact type was either E, M or T, it's much easier to say contact type is in EMT rather than saying contact type equals E or contact type equals M or contact type equals T. So you can see much, much easier to do it that way. And we'll see a little bit later on how we can actually make use of that as part of the criteria for our report rather than having to put in 3 separate criteria. The opposite of in is not in, so NI. So it's basically exactly the opposite. So if you had donor types of C for corporate, I for individual, and T for trust, and you were using a criteria in your calculated field, but you wanted it to be true if it wasn't a C or an I or a T, you could use is not found in. And then we've got starts with. So obviously if we're looking for something like a campaign, maybe they do start with tax, then this would work. So if it was tax 13, tax 14, tax 15, that would work. Also that first one that I've got there, the contains, would work as well. Okay, now as you've also seen with Gary, you can put brackets around. So like with the mathematical equation, brackets will influence the order in which a string or a criteria is evaluated. And Gary showed you some examples there where we had and. So in that case, both criteria that we put in there must be true, whereas with or, one or the other must be true. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into Visrep and have a look at this. Oh, I don't have it running, sorry. Not very well prepared there. Now, I should mention that at this stage while we're logging in, that, all of this is available in the latest version of the manual. Now, the manual is available on the ASI website, and you can download that from the Donman community under resources. So if you want to actually get the updated manual, it's only about a month old. It contains all of the stuff that we're talking about here with all the different options that I've been through. So I'm going to go into Visual Reporter. And hopefully I've got some report formats that I've set up here. So if we have a look at example 1, this is a fairly simple one. I'm doing a report on the donor file. At this stage I've got no criterion whatsoever, so it's actually going to give me every single donor record. And I've got some calculated fields that I'm outputting. So if I go into design, we can see basically I've taken the month, is the month from their date of birth, and the year from the date of birth. So when I have a look at my preview, you can see, well, quite a lot of them don't have birthdays, but I've got some here with 3, 5, etc., etc. If you wanted to do a report on all people having a birthday in the month of March so that you could send them a card, all we need to do is in our criteria, like Gary has shown you earlier on, we can put in our criteria here. But instead of picking from the donors file, we simply pick from our calculated fields, and I would pick the month, and I'd say the month equals 3, and then I just run my preview, and now it shows me just the 4 people on my file that we do have a birthday where that birthday is in the month of March. And you can also see that I'm not actually outputting the year because that's irrelevant to me. I can see their date of birth here anyway. If I want to change that to the month of April, then it's a very simple change, and that's done. Okay, let me go to another report that I've set up. So this is going to be a report on the pledge file. So at the moment, again, I've got no criteria. I've only got about 80 pledge records in my sample data here. And I've got a number of fields here that I'm outputting. So let's have a quick look at those. So now I should also mention too, the version of Visrep that you have, these 3 buttons here will actually be over to the side there. Now we felt that that was a bit of an imposition because that would mean that you would have to actually maximize the visual reporter in order to gain access to those buttons. So in later releases, you'll see that these buttons have been moved across. So I've got lapsed here. So a bit like we saw before, I'm taking today's date. Let me bring that up a bit better. I'm taking today's date. I'm subtracting the date of the next pledge, and if it's greater than 60, I'm putting in the words lapsed. Otherwise, I'm not putting anything in there. Now, I also, if I show you the preview, I've got this comments field here that's been filled out. Now, you'll see that it's basically the same format. So if someone's been rung, then it's actually got the date following that. And then if there was some amount or some value that was as a result of that, I've put that in there. What that means is I can now use that, the option for mid to actually extract the data from there. Now I know that that starts at column 10, and this field is a length of 10 characters. So when I go back to design and have a look at the rang, oh, sorry, that's a different one. Basically, it's looking to see if it starts, if the comments field from the pledge record starts with rang on, then I'm actually putting nothing there. Otherwise, it's putting never being contacted. Whereas down here, I've got basically, I'll bring that up. You can see I've used that mid function. I've taken the pledge comments field. I'm starting at the 10th character, and I'm going for 10 characters. So when if I've got that on my screen, no, I don't have that at this stage, so I can now add that. So I go down to here, I select calculated fields, and I can put in my lapsed, rang, I'll put in the date of last contact at this stage, and if I preview my results, did I do something wrong there? Okay. I'm a bit perplexed as to why they haven't come up there. Well, there's an interesting problem. I'm not sure why they haven't actually come up there. Calculated. All right, it was certainly working for me last night. All right, now if I go back to design, I've got these 2 fields here. So if I have a look at this one here, what I've done is I've actually looked at the donor type to see if it's in I, TC, or B. So I have some donor types. In fact, if I go back to my preview, I've got donor types here of I, C, TC, B, things like that. If I was going to say, look, I only want I, TC, or B, in my criterion, I can certainly put in, something like, and go to select donors, and go to donor type. Too far. You can say donor type equals, and then I can either type an I there, or I can click on the question mark to get a choice. I can do I there. I can then go next criteria and go or, and I could do the same thing, donor type equals TC, and then I could put another one, or donor type equals C, and that would then work. Alternatively to that, if I have this, if I've got this select here, if I look at this one, if it's in I, well, if my donor type is in either I, T, C, or B, then it will work. Now, I will work, TC will work, and B will work as well. So whichever of those 3 it picks, it will give me a yes, and then in my criteria, I can just go, I only want those people where that field is a yes. But there's going to be a little bit of a problem with that, so I'll just show you what it's going to do. So if I use select 1, which is what I was, and go OK, if that equals a capital Y, you might expect it to get just those 3 values there. But if I go to my preview, you'll notice I'm also getting C, because C is in fact in that string. So when I look at this string here, you can see that C is there. So as far as it's concerned, the donor type of C is within that string. So there are some limitations as to how you use that. So if I now look at the second one, what I'm doing is I'm taking my donor type and I'm adding a tilde in front of it and a tilde at the end of it, and then I'm looking to see whether that is contained within tilde I, tilde TC, tilde B. So C in here would actually be tilde C tilde, and that of course does not then appear in here. So if I make use of select 2, then I should only get those fields, those records that I'm after. So if I now go back to my preview, now those characters or the donor types of C that were there before are now no longer coming out. So if you had a large number of those different things, putting a whole lot of I, this or this or this or this or this or this there can be rather painful, and it also means you've got to make sure that your bracketing is correct so that it evaluates that field correctly. However, by using a calculated field to do that sort of selection, it does become very easy, because in this case, if we wanted to add something else, we just have to add maybe, if there was, well, if we wanted C, we could put that there with a tilde. Wrong character. And so it's very easy to add a large number of those different things all in there to simplify that, that selection. So I'm going to end there. As I said, we do have this in the manual. So you can download the latest version of the manual, and that's always a good thing because you'll get all the other updates that are in there as well. So I'm going to hand back now to Marla, who can go through any questions that we might have.
Thanks, Murray. Just a reminder to everyone, if they do have any questions, you can open that question pane on the right-hand side, sorry, the control panel on the right-hand side of your viewer window, and type your question in the question pane, and I can read them out. So just going back to actually when Gary was talking, we had a question from Genevieve. And Gary, are you there?
I'm here.
I'll read it out. Okay. From Genevieve, how do we know how to write a formula to create the calculated field?
That is the tough part about knowing how formulas work. It's, you know, that's something that we can't teach you. It's sort of beyond the scope of this. It's really just saying if you are comfortable with doing formulas and you've used them in Excel and things like that, but other things like the ones that we've shown you, we've got examples of, and we can certainly, you know, send those to people. So if you use this as your criteria, you can then utilize that in the report. But as far as, you know, sorting out the logic of how the formula and things work, it's really, you know, that's something you need to have some knowledge of beforehand.
When it comes to simple mathematical ones, we've got the basic operators of plus, minus, times, divide. We've also got one called modulus, which is looking at the remainder. So if you just wanted to add two fields together, or like some of those simple calculations that Gary did, it is just a matter of doing adding and subtracting. If you need brackets to do the calculations first, you put the brackets around it. So with Gary, when he was doing the dates, or the age, sorry, he did T minus the date of birth, and then he put all of that around brackets, and following that he then divided by basically the number of days in a year, which is 365 1/4. So that then calculated the actual age. When it comes to actually entering it, when you go into design, it is just simply a matter of you add the field, you put in the name, whatever you want, you call it junk, and then down in here, you do need to know the names of the fields. Now, you know, I know that there's a pledge.nextDate field. But if I mistype that, unfortunately, it's going to come up with some really weird answer because, you know, if it's next date 2, or next date 1, which doesn't exist, then it's not actually going to be able to read that field. So to a large extent, you do need to know the name of the field and which file it's from. But if you're at this advanced stage of using Visrep, then you probably know that. And of course, with those field names, if you go back to your data tab, see this is a report on the pledge file. So down the bottom here, you've actually got the names of those, and where I've actually chosen to output them, you've got pledge.donor number, pledge.campaign, pledge.frequency. So any of these fields that we see in here that I can scroll through are from the pledge file. So you can make use of any of those as part of your calculation. In this case, I've got access to the donors file, the campaign file as well, and of course the calculated fields. So here I'm now looking at the fields in the donor file, and you can see over here I've got donor type. So this would be what you would need to use within it, and then you use those various mathematical functions, the add, the subtract, to do your calculations, and then you can use some of those functions like the month, or you can use the if then else to actually then do some more sophisticated things with it.
Thanks, Murray. Question from Stuart. So is every formula you can use in a calculation also usable in the criteria pane? For instance, is the in function now available in the criteria pane?
Yes, well, once you've created the calculated field, you can then use that as part of the criteria.
Yes, but the actual criteria screen itself is not that. So if you wanted to use an in, you'd have to use a calculated field, and then just depending on the value that you specify in your calculated field, like in my case I did a Y or an N, you could then use that as your criteria. So you just say the calculated field is equal to a Y, and that would then work. But no, there's no change to the actual criteria screen.
Okay. That looks to be all of our questions for today, so we might wrap it up there a little bit early, so that's always good. Thank you, Gary and Murray, for today's webcast, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Our next live webcast is scheduled for Tuesday, the 19th of April at 2 o'clock, so that'll be Eastern Standard Time, and that's on basic selection file creation. Details are already on our website for that, and you are welcome to register now. So that's at donman.net.au under resources. I will be sure to email out a reminder prior to that as well. So you'll also find recordings of all of our webcasts at our website as well at donman.net.au under the resources tab and then recorded webcasts. And we also post links to those in our regular newsletter. So if you do have any further questions today, you're welcome to email us at info_donman@advsol.com, or feel free to give us a call. So that concludes our webcast for today. So thank you all for joining us, and goodbye for now.
Goodbye.
Bye now.